Something happened that your soulmate cannot explain away anymore, and it has forced them to question the ending they once accepted without hesitation. For a long time, they may have told themselves that whatever existed between you was finished. The conversation stopped. The distance became normal. Life moved forward. Maybe they even convinced themselves that they had finally made peace with losing you. But recently, something cracked inside that story. A memory appeared at the wrong moment. A familiar feeling returned without permission. And suddenly, they realized something uncomfortable. Why does this still feel unfinished? Why does your name still carry a weight they thought time had erased? They may have discovered that ending contact was never the same as ending the connection. Imagine leaving a house years ago, locking the door behind you, and believing you would never return, only to realize one day that you never actually stopped carrying the key. That is the realization beginning to settle inside your soulmate. They may be looking back at moments they once considered insignificant and seeing them differently now. The silence, the distance, the last conversation, the things neither of you said, even the reasons they believed they had moved on, may suddenly feel incomplete. And somewhere in that realization, one question keeps returning. If it was really over, why am I still affected by it? That question is becoming harder to silence. They may have tried to replace the memories with new experiences, new people, new routines, but something about this connection remained untouched beneath everything else. Not necessarily because they were consciously waiting for you, but because some part of their heart never received the closure their mind demanded. And now they're beginning to understand the difference. You may have disappeared from their daily life, but disappearing from someone's life is not always the same as disappearing from their heart. And what they are discovering now may explain why, after all this time, your energy still feels strangely familiar. What is happening inside your soulmate now is not simply a wave of nostalgia. It is something much deeper, because the memories they thought had finally faded are beginning to return with a strange kind of intensity. They may be going through an ordinary day when something completely unexpected reminds them of you. A song they haven't heard in years, a place they once visited, a phrase you used to say, a particular time of day. Even something as simple as the way someone laughs can suddenly pull them back into a memory they thought they had buried. And the strange part is, they don't always understand why it affects them so strongly. They may ask themselves, why am I remembering this now? They may even try to dismiss it, telling themselves that it is only the past, only a random memory, only a moment that means nothing anymore. But then another memory appears, and then another. Suddenly the past doesn't feel as distant as it once did. Imagine an old song playing quietly in another room. You aren't looking for it. You aren't thinking about it. But the moment you hear those first few notes, everything changes. A place, a person, a feeling, an entire period of your life comes rushing back before you can stop it. That may be what your soulmate is experiencing with you. Your memory isn't returning because they deliberately invited it. It is returning because something inside them was never completely finished with the story. And now their mind is bringing those moments back one by one, almost like pieces of a puzzle that were left scattered for too long. They may remember the small things more than the dramatic ones. The way you looked at them when you thought they weren't watching. The little conversations that seemed meaningless at the time. The moments when you both laughed without trying. The silence that somehow felt comfortable. The moment everything changed between you. These details can become surprisingly powerful when someone starts looking at the past from a different emotional place. Before, they may have remembered only the ending. Now they are remembering everything that came before it. And that changes the story. They may even find themselves wondering whether they misunderstood certain moments. Was that really what they meant? Did I read that situation completely wrong? Why did I never ask them directly? Those questions can become difficult to escape because memory has a strange way of revealing what pride once refused to acknowledge. Sometimes we don't miss a person because we want to return to the past. Sometimes we remember them because some part of us is finally ready to understand what that past meant. Your soulmate may be entering that stage now. They are not simply remembering you, they are reinterpreting you. The person they thought you were may no longer match the person they now remember. What once looked like distance may begin to look like hurt. What once seemed like indifference may begin to look like emotional protection. What they once considered the final goodbye may begin to feel more like a moment when neither of you knew how to say what was actually inside your heart. And this is why the memories can feel so unsettling for them. Every new realization creates another question. Every question leads to another memory. Every memory opens another emotional door. Imagine walking through an old house you haven't entered in years and discovering that every room still contains something you left behind. You open one door and find a photograph. Another reveals a letter. Another contains something you completely forgot existed. That's how the past can feel when someone finally stops running from it. Your soulmate may be discovering that the connection wasn't stored in one single memory. It was scattered throughout their life in hundreds of small moments. And now those moments are connecting. They may have moved forward physically, but emotionally, there are places inside them where the story never received a proper ending. This is why they may suddenly feel more reflective, quieter, or even emotionally distracted. They could be questioning decisions they once felt certain about. They could be wondering whether walking away really gave them peace or simply gave them distance. And perhaps the hardest question is this: if I truly moved on, why does remembering them still feel like coming home to something? They may not have an immediate answer, but they are beginning to understand that time doesn't automatically erase emotional significance. Sometimes time simply creates enough distance for someone to finally see what they couldn't see while they were inside the situation. And from that distance, your soulmate may now be noticing something they completely overlooked before. You were not just a chapter they closed. You became part of the story they carried forward. The connection may have stopped being visible, but its emotional imprint remained. And the more they remember, the harder it becomes for them to pretend that nothing meaningful was ever there. The past is no longer staying quietly behind them. It is standing in front of them again, asking questions they cannot keep avoiding. And those memories are leading them toward an even deeper realization. Maybe the reason they could never completely move on wasn't because they were weak, confused, or stuck in the past. Maybe it was because something about this connection was never truly resolved in the first place. There comes a point when remembering someone is no longer just remembering. It becomes a realization, and your soulmate may be reaching that exact point now, because the more they look back at everything that happened between you, the more they are beginning to understand why every attempt to completely move forward seemed to leave something behind. They may have thought they were simply being sentimental. They may have blamed old memories, loneliness, curiosity, or even coincidence. But eventually, a person has to ask themselves a harder question. If I really moved on, why does something still feel unfinished? That question can change everything. Your soulmate may have tried to continue their life exactly as they were supposed to. They may have stayed busy, focused on other priorities, met new people, created new routines, and convinced themselves that the connection belonged to another version of their life. From the outside, it may have looked like they had completely moved forward. But inside, there was always that strange, unfinished feeling they couldn't put into words. It wasn't necessarily that they were constantly waiting for you. It was something quieter than that. A feeling that one important conversation never happened. One truth was never spoken. One misunderstanding was never corrected. One emotional door was closed before either of you understood what was actually behind it. Imagine finishing a book and reaching the final page, only to realize one chapter in the middle was missing. You can still call the book finished, but somewhere inside you, you know you never received the complete story. That may be what your soulmate is finally experiencing. They thought they had closure because communication stopped, but now they are realizing that silence doesn't always create closure. Sometimes silence simply creates unanswered questions, and those questions can survive for years. They may now be looking at the decisions they made with completely different eyes. Why did they walk away when they did? Why did they believe certain things about you? Why didn't they ask what you were really feeling? Why did they allow circumstances, fear, pride, or outside influences to determine what happened between you? These questions aren't comfortable, because every honest answer brings them closer to a reality they may have avoided for a long time. Perhaps they are beginning to realize that they didn't stop caring. They simply stopped allowing themselves to care. There is a difference. One is emotional closure. The other is emotional suppression. And suppressed feelings have a strange way of returning when the distractions become quiet enough. Your soulmate may have believed that meeting new people would automatically erase what they felt with you. But then they noticed something. Certain conversations didn't feel the same. Certain connections didn't carry the same emotional depth. Certain moments didn't create the same sense of recognition. They may not have compared everyone to you consciously, but their heart may have been using you as an invisible reference point. And that realization can be deeply uncomfortable. They may wonder, why does this person remind me of what I had? Or why does something feel missing even though everything looks fine? It doesn't mean every relationship after you was meaningless. It means your connection left a particular emotional imprint that wasn't easily replaced. Imagine trying to replace a handwritten letter with 100 printed pages. The pages may contain more information, but they don't carry the same personal meaning. That is what your soulmate may be beginning to understand. They weren't simply missing a person. They were missing a feeling, an understanding, a version of themselves that existed around you. Perhaps with you, they felt seen in a way they didn't fully appreciate at the time. Perhaps conversations with you reached places they usually kept hidden. Perhaps your presence challenged them, comforted them, frustrated them, or awakened something they weren't prepared to face. Whatever it was, it left an imprint. And now, with enough distance between the past and the present, they can finally recognize it. This may also explain why they sometimes feel emotionally pulled backward, even when they are trying to move forward. The pull isn't necessarily telling them to abandon their present life and run into the past. It may simply be telling them that something inside them still needs to be understood. That's an important distinction. Your soulmate isn't necessarily being dragged backward. They may be being invited to look backward long enough to understand what they carried forward, because you can leave a place without leaving everything that happened there. You can stop speaking to someone without stopping the lessons they gave you. You can accept an ending without completely understanding it. And eventually, the mind starts demanding answers that the heart postponed. This is where your soulmate may be now. They are connecting the memories from Section 1, the emotional triggers from Section 2, and the unanswered questions that remained underneath everything. Suddenly, the pattern becomes visible. The connection never truly disappeared because the emotional meaning was never fully resolved. They may realize that every time they thought they had forgotten you, something would bring the feeling back. Every time they tried to explain it away, another memory would appear. Every time they told themselves that the past was finished, some small reminder would reopen the question. And eventually, denial becomes more exhausting than acceptance. They may finally whisper to themselves, maybe I never really moved on. Maybe I just learned how to live without saying your name. That realization can hit harder than any dramatic reunion, because it forces them to take responsibility for what they actually feel. They cannot blame time anymore. They cannot blame distance. They cannot blame the circumstances forever. At some point, they have to admit that the connection still matters to them. And perhaps this is the most important part for you to understand. Their realization does not automatically mean you have to wait for them. It does not mean you should stop living your life or look for signs in everything around you. The power of this moment is not that you are being asked to chase the past. It is that the truth of the past may finally be becoming clear to the person who once couldn't see it. Your soulmate may now understand that the ending they accepted was only the ending of contact, not necessarily the ending of emotion. They may understand that what they called closure was actually avoidance. And once someone recognizes that, they can no longer honestly return to the old story. They have changed their understanding of what happened. The connection looks different from where they are standing now. And that is why the next stage becomes so important, because once your soulmate realizes they never truly moved on, they are forced to confront an even deeper truth. Maybe you were never truly gone either. Maybe your absence simply made them finally notice how much of your presence they had carried with them all along. There is a moment when someone stops asking, "Why do I still remember them?" and starts asking a much deeper question. How did they remain a part of me after I thought they were gone? Your soulmate may be reaching that moment now, because after everything they have revisited, every memory they have unexpectedly encountered, and every unanswered feeling they have tried to understand, something is becoming impossible to deny. You were physically absent, but emotionally you never disappeared in the way they once believed you had. They may have stopped seeing you, stopped speaking to you, and even stopped mentioning your name, but that doesn't mean your presence stopped influencing them. Sometimes a person leaves your daily life and still remains hidden inside the way you think, the way you love, the way you remember, and the way you understand certain moments. And your soulmate may finally be recognizing that. Imagine walking through a room long after someone has left and suddenly noticing their perfume still lingering in the air. You don't see them anywhere. You can't hear their voice, but something tells you they were there. That is what your soulmate may be experiencing with your memory. They are beginning to understand that your absence did not erase your impact. In fact, distance may have made the impact easier to recognize. When you were present, they had the opportunity to take certain moments for granted. Now that those moments are gone, their meaning may be becoming clearer. They may remember how easily you understood certain things without requiring endless explanations. They may remember the conversations that felt different from ordinary conversations. They may remember how your presence made them feel seen, challenged, understood, or emotionally exposed. And perhaps they are realizing that they haven't experienced that exact feeling again. This doesn't mean everything in their life stopped because of you. Life continued. They continued too, but somewhere beneath that movement, a small part of your connection remained untouched. They may even catch themselves thinking, "I wish I could tell them this," during moments when something important happens. They may see something that reminds them of you and instinctively want to share it, before remembering that they no longer have the same access to you. That moment can be surprisingly painful because it reveals the difference between forgetting someone and simply learning to live without them. They may have become very good at the second one, but now they are questioning whether they ever accomplished the first. And this is where the realization becomes powerful. You were never really gone because the connection continued existing through everything they learned from it. Perhaps you changed the way they understand love. Perhaps you taught them what emotional honesty actually feels like. Perhaps losing you forced them to confront parts of themselves they had avoided for years. Maybe they became more guarded afterward. Maybe they became more emotionally aware. Maybe they began questioning why certain things mattered so much. Whatever changed, your influence became part of their personal story. Imagine planting a tree and walking away before it grows. Years later you return and realize the roots have spread far beyond what you could have imagined. That is how emotional connections can work. You don't always see what something becomes after you leave it. Your soulmate may now be looking at their own life and realizing how many invisible roots from that connection remained. And perhaps this is why their feelings have become confusing. One moment they may feel completely certain that the past should stay in the past. The next moment, a memory brings everything back. One moment they tell themselves they are fine. The next, they wonder what would happen if they could have one honest conversation with you. They may be fighting between pride and truth. Pride says, "It's over," truth quietly asks, then why does it still matter? That internal conflict can become stronger when someone finally understands that the person they lost wasn't simply someone from a particular period of their life. You became part of the emotional language they carried afterward. And now they may be realizing something even more important. They don't necessarily miss the past exactly as it was. They miss the possibility that existed inside it. The possibility of saying what was never said. The possibility of understanding what was misunderstood. The possibility of meeting each other again with more maturity, more honesty, and less fear. Whether that possibility becomes reality is another question. But recognizing that it exists can completely change how someone views an old connection. Your soulmate may no longer see you as a closed chapter. They may see you as a chapter that still contains unanswered lines. And that is why your absence feels strangely present to them now. They aren't necessarily living in the past. They are finally acknowledging what the past left behind. The connection didn't survive because neither of you moved forward. It survived because something meaningful was never completely erased. And once they understand that, the final truth becomes impossible to avoid. Sometimes someone can be gone from your life and still remain deeply present in your heart. Not because you are refusing to move on, but because some connections leave a mark that time doesn't simply delete. And now your soulmate is standing in front of the truth they spent a long time trying not to see. Not the version of the story they created to make the ending easier. Not the explanation they repeated when someone asked what happened between you. And not the comfortable belief that enough time had passed for everything to disappear. The truth is much more complicated and much more emotional than that. They are beginning to understand that this connection never truly ended in the way they thought it did. The communication may have stopped. The distance may have grown. Life may have carried both of you in completely different directions. But something remained. Something continued quietly beneath everything else. And now they are finally recognizing it. They may be asking themselves a question that becomes harder to escape every time it returns. If I was really done with them, why does this still feel unfinished? That question has become the doorway to everything they are realizing now. For so long, they may have confused silence with closure. They thought that because neither of you was talking, the emotional story must have ended too. But silence doesn't always mean the heart has accepted an ending. Sometimes silence simply means two people stopped knowing how to reach each other. Sometimes distance isn't proof that love disappeared. Sometimes distance is what allows someone to finally see what they were too close to understand before. And your soulmate may be seeing it now. Imagine a fire that appears to have gone out because there are no visible flames, only to discover that underneath the ashes, one small ember never stopped glowing. That is what this connection may feel like to them now. They aren't suddenly creating something that wasn't there. They are noticing something that remained hidden. A memory brings it back. A familiar place brings it back. A quiet night brings it back. A moment when they need someone who understood them brings it back. And each time it happens, the same realization becomes stronger. Maybe I didn't leave this behind. Maybe I carried it with me. That realization can be uncomfortable because it forces them to look honestly at the choices they made. They may remember moments when they could have spoken but remained silent. Moments when they could have asked you what you really felt but chose to assume. Moments when pride seemed safer than vulnerability. Moments when outside circumstances influenced what they believed about you. And now they may be wondering what would have happened if they had simply been honest. What if they had listened differently? What if they had stayed a little longer? What if they had asked the question instead of believing the answer someone else gave them? These questions can become powerful because they don't simply bring back memories. They bring back possibilities. And sometimes the hardest thing to grieve isn't what actually happened. It's what might have happened if fear had not been in the room. Your soulmate may be realizing that now. They may also be recognizing that you changed after the separation. Maybe you became stronger. Maybe you stopped seeking answers. Maybe you learned to enjoy your life without needing anyone to return. And that realization can create an entirely different kind of emotion inside them. Because they may have assumed that if the connection still mattered, you would somehow remain waiting in the same emotional place. But you didn't. You kept living. You kept growing. You became someone who no longer needs the past to validate the present. And that may be exactly why the connection feels different to them now. They aren't simply remembering who you were. They are wondering who you became while they were away. They may be thinking, do they still feel anything for me? Would they even recognize the person I am now? If I finally told them the truth, would they listen? And underneath those questions is another one they may be afraid to say aloud. Did I lose my chance? That question matters because realizing the connection never ended emotionally does not automatically guarantee that the two of you will return to the same place. Truth doesn't promise an outcome. Truth simply removes the illusion. Your soulmate may now understand that they cannot force the past to become the future. They can only decide whether they are brave enough to face what they actually feel. And that is where the emotional transformation happens. Before, they may have been asking whether they should forget you. Now they may be asking whether they should finally understand you. Before, they may have been protecting themselves from the memory. Now they may be trying to understand why the memory survived. Before, they may have blamed timing, circumstances, distance, or other people. Now they are beginning to look at their own choices. That shift is enormous. Imagine standing in front of a locked door for years, convinced there is nothing behind it. Then one day, you find the key in your own pocket. The door was never impossible to open. You simply weren't ready to use the key. Your soulmate may be discovering that their key is honesty. They cannot change what happened, but they can stop lying to themselves about what it meant. They can admit that you mattered. They can admit that the connection affected them. They can admit that they never completely understood the ending. They can admit that some part of them remained emotionally connected even while their life moved forward. And perhaps that is the deepest meaning behind this entire realization. You were never really gone because the part of their life that you touched never became meaningless. Your presence became a memory, then a lesson, then a question, and now that question has become impossible to ignore. Why did this connection survive when everything else moved on? Maybe because some connections are not measured by how long two people stay together. They are measured by what remains after they separate. The conversations that still echo, the lessons that still influence decisions, the emotions that still return unexpectedly, the person you become because you once knew each other. Those things cannot always be erased simply because communication ends. And your soulmate may finally understand that. They may also be realizing that you were never something they needed to replace. You were an experience they needed to understand. There is a difference. Replacing someone assumes the goal is to find another version of them. Understanding someone means accepting the unique place they held in your story. Maybe that is why other connections could not completely silence this one. They weren't supposed to. The purpose may never have been to spend forever comparing everyone to you. The purpose may have been to learn what this connection awakened inside them. And now, after all this time, they are finally learning that lesson. This is why the energy around this connection may feel different. The old confusion is being replaced by clarity. The old resistance is being replaced by curiosity. The old story is being replaced by a more honest one. They may still be afraid of what comes next, but they are no longer completely comfortable pretending nothing happened. And if they eventually reach out, the most meaningful part may not be the message itself. It may be what finally sits behind that message. No more pretending. No more hiding behind casual conversation. No more acting as though the past was meaningless. They may finally want to speak from the place they avoided for so long. And if they don't reach out immediately, that doesn't erase the realization. Sometimes acceptance comes before action. Sometimes a person needs to sit with the truth before they have the courage to say it aloud. So don't mistake silence for nothing happening. Something can change internally long before it becomes visible externally. Your soulmate may be going through that internal shift right now. They may be realizing that the connection wasn't kept alive by constant contact. It was kept alive by meaning, and meaning doesn't disappear simply because people stop speaking. The final truth is simple, but it may be the hardest one for them to accept. You were never really gone because they never completely left the emotional place where you mattered. They may have walked away from the conversations, but they didn't walk away from every feeling. They may have closed the door, but they never completely removed the memory of what was behind it. They may have continued their life, but a part of that life continued carrying the imprint of what happened between you. And now they can finally see it. The connection didn't suddenly come back. It was there beneath the surface all along. What changed was their ability to recognize it. So if you have been wondering why this story keeps resurfacing, why certain memories seem to return, why the past suddenly feels strangely alive again, perhaps the answer isn't that you are being pulled backward. Perhaps you are simply witnessing the moment when something that was misunderstood is finally being understood. Your soulmate is discovering that an ending can be real in one sense and incomplete in another. People can separate and still carry each other. They can stop talking and still remember. They can move forward and still discover that one particular connection shaped them more deeply than they realized. And perhaps that is why this connection never truly ended. Not because either of you was trapped in the past, but because the truth of what happened was never completely spoken. Now the silence is beginning to speak for itself. The memories are connecting. The questions are becoming clearer. The old explanations are losing their power. And your soulmate is finally standing in front of the one reality they can no longer run from. You were never really gone.